Remember playing hide and seek as a kid? Imagine playing that same game with a bunch of masked weirdos who want to introduce your face to the curb. This is no children's game I speak of, but the notorious stealth game known as Manhunt, a game produced by Rockstar in 2003. Today it's known as one of the most controversial games of all time. But what exactly makes Manhunt a controversial game? Find out in this retrospective. Manhunt was developed and released in 2003 by the notorious Rockstar Games. Throughout the early 2000s, their releases for the GTA series such as GTA 3, Vice City were some of the highest selling releases. However, the graphic depictions of sex and violence featured in the game also garnered a lot of negative attention. Parents particularly were outraged by what kids could actually do in the game. Criminal activities such as stealing cars, picking up prostitutes, and killing people, as you can expect, was frowned upon by most. But this didn't keep kids from playing it. If you couldn't get a copy of a GTA game, you could borrow it from a friend or get your older cousin to buy it for you. Or you could just play it at someone's house. But the larger point is that the GTA series of games had ignited the same level of negative backlash as Mortal Kombat did in the early 90s for the video game industry. And particular attention was placed on again how violence depicted in video games could negatively influence children. Many critics were quick to point out that the GTA games rewarded you for causing violence and destruction, along with glamorizing criminal activity. But nonetheless, this didn't keep GTA 3 and Vice City from becoming commercial successes. Given all the negativity surrounding the GTA games, it's anyone's guess why Rockstar would move on to develop what would arguably be a murder simulator.
Yeah, they're simulated violence.
It's a criminal simulator, a murder simulator.
Yeah.
That's right, I use the term murder simulator, because that's what it is. In Manhunt, you play as James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who was supposed to be executed. Instead, he is thrown in a twisted movie where he stars as the killer. Long before development even began, the employees at Rockstar were hesitant to actually lend their name to creating this stealth game. One particular developer by the name of Jeff Williams even stated in a blog post that the employees were in a huge uproar over the game. Williams expressed that those employees were turned off by the sheer violence and gore depicted in the game. And while GTA games did have plenty of violence, Williams went on to say that those games never had you hurting anyone that wasn't the bad guy. A person could in fact play GTA in an ethical manner. He also added that the GTA games were meant to be parodies. And in hindsight, Manhunt is the complete opposite. It was developed with the intent of displaying realistic scenes of violence in a non-joking manner. Manhunt takes inspiration from many sources such as the Hitman series of games and Splinter Cell games. But its main inspiration draws from the film The Running Man starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just like in The Running Man, Cash has to participate and defeat his pursuing opponents in order to gain his freedom in a televised event. Well, I say televised loosely because the only person who's watching Cash perform his deeds is the sick and twisted director, played by actor Brian Cox.
Turn the Slash world on its head.
Control-wise, Manhunt maintains some similarity to the GTA games, with L1 being the lock-on button while Square acts as the attack button. But moving is very different. Cash's regular speed is walking. In order to run, you have to hold down the R1 button in the direction of the joystick. The basic core of the game is to stick to the shadows, avoid detection, and pick off opponents one by one. By sticking to the shadows, you can avoid multiple hunters who are participating in the film as well. These hunters vary in terms of dress and insults. Many of them actually draw some inspiration from the 70s film The Warriors. With these guys, you might be able to take the first hunters one by one, but games like the Warhogs and the Hoods are extremely tough. Generally, when it comes to the enemy AI of the hunters, the game can be pretty inconsistent. Sometimes the AI functions amazingly, and other times not so much. Manhunt is definitely a game that encourages you to take your time. Its dark and unsettling atmosphere in the levels makes you hesitate to rush through stages. And additionally, every time you run, you make more noise and increase your chance of being discovered, along with draining your stamina meter. Hunters can be identified using the radar map provided below. If the markers on your map are indicated as yellow, the hunters are unaware of your location. If the markers are orange, they might know where you are and will come around your area. If the markers are red, then they know your location and they're coming to kill you. In hindsight, I guess it wouldn't be fair to say that this game encourages you to take your time, as the longer you take, the lower your score will be at the end, and it will also piss the director off.
You're pushing my patience. I want to see blood, Cash. Blood!
But in general, gameplay does make you more aware and more careful of your movements and the sounds you cause. Plus, the more noise you are causing, the less likely you are to pull off the more difficult executions. And that brings us to the bread and butter of the game. Cash can perform a great number of executions using almost anything such as common tools, blunt objects, or any blades he finds. In pulling off executions, you simply need to hit L1 to lock onto your opponent, then press and release the square or X button. In order to help you line up to your opponents, Rockstar included the use of the L2 and R2 button. By holding down either one of these buttons, you can move more akin to your target. Once you pull off the execution, the game switches to the same camera being used to record the film, and the player takes the role of the mysterious director watching the events unfold. The longer you hold your target in place, the more brutal the slaying will be shown on the camera. In terms of variety, well, Rockstar gave all the execution weapons 3 types of kills. As you can probably guess, Rockstar got the most heat for the execution scenes. I mean, when looking back at them, there really wasn't nothing comparable to this sheer level of graphic violence at the time. The killings in Manhunt are drawn out in detail with the sound of gurgling blood and skull-crushing noises. Overall, Manhunt is not a game for those who don't enjoy endless murder sprees. But pulling off executions in this style is what makes the game memorable today. Other than that, Manhunt at best is a mediocre game. It has clumsy and awkward controls, and at times Cash moves way too slow to try to pull off any executions. And in various times I found myself twisted up in dealing with the various camera angles at various parts. And it goes without saying that the game is full of some ugly textures and levels that have not held up well. But these problems aside, I will mention that Manhunt has plenty to offer in terms of graphics and sounds. The graphics in the game are gritty and gory and feature plenty of blood, while the music and sound effects are done extremely well, particularly when it comes to gunshots and walking over puddles of blood and brains. Manhunt today is probably known more for the controversial aspects of its release. One instance came in the form of a proposed bill to fine companies for selling adult theme games to minors. This bill was proposed by US Representative Joe Baca of California, claiming that the game was teaching children how to perform murder. And to be honest, I can kinda see that. Manhunt did feature those cutscenes for just about every execution. And another instance of controversy came in the form of a serious murder that took place on July 28, 2004. One teenager by the name of Stefan Pakaran, resident of Lincolnshire, England, was killed by assailant Warren LeBlanc with a hammer. Prior to this incident, it was reported that Warren LeBlanc had become obsessed with the game Manhunt, even to the point of reenacting the hammer execution shown in the game. Now, whether this violent incident was directly tied to LeBlanc's obsession, it's not really clear. And finally, the game was banned in both Australia and New Zealand a few months after its release, after only selling around 18,000 copies. Now, personally, I don't believe that video game violence is directly linked to real life violence. However, when it comes to Rockstar, I think the company did truly invent an innovative and eye-catching murder simulator. If one were to make the connection between real life and video game violence, Manhunt would serve as a prime example, simply for the fact that the game did showcase some of the most realistic video game violence with no reservations whatsoever. After playing Manhunt again, it really has me thinking about the role that video game companies have in marketing simulated violence or adult themes. I mean, you look at a company like Rockstar, marketing a highly violent game in a time when everyone was getting in uproars over violent video games. And even in the modern world, when some questions were raised about gambling in video games, what did Rockstar do? Rockstar released an entire casino DLC for GTA 5, which strongly promoted gambling in video games. But back to Manhunt. As controversial as Manhunt was, it would seem like a trip to Pee-wee's Playhouse compared to some of their other games such as GTA 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2. And when we look at games like Manhunt, we can point out Rockstar as one of the first companies in the early 2000s to raise the bar regarding what video games could get away with